But because you never learned its language, you assumed it was attacking you. You thought the fear inside you was trying to hold you back. You thought the anger within you was out to ruin your relationships. You thought your sadness was trying to drown you. You thought your insecurities were trying to sabotage you. So you built walls. You tightened your grip. You shoved it all down and called that control. But the truth is, these inner forces don't disappear when you push them away. They grow louder. They become shadows, shaping your behavior from behind the curtain. And the more you refuse to see them, the more power they quietly gain over your life. Most people live their entire lives believing they are in control, when in reality they are being controlled by the very emotions they refuse to face. They are driven by fear disguised as logic, by insecurity disguised as ambition, by loneliness disguised as independence. They go through life avoiding the difficult parts of themselves, while proudly claiming they have moved on, when in reality they've only moved away, not forward. You might think you're making rational decisions, but how many of them are actually built on old wounds you never healed? How many of your goals are fueled by the desire to prove someone wrong? How many of the people you chase are mirrors of childhood patterns you never resolved? How many of your reactions today are ghosts of experiences you never processed? This is the subtle tragedy of the inner battle. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't scream, "This is trauma," or "This is fear." It simply nudges you from the shadows, guiding your choices without you even noticing. You avoid conflict because you grew up walking on eggshells. You attach too quickly because you were once abandoned. You distance yourself because closeness once hurt you. You overachieve because you learned love must be earned. You never ask for help because you were taught your needs don't matter. You become silent because your voice was ignored. You become loud because silence once felt like suffocation. You become cold because softness was once punished. You become fine because that was the only acceptable answer. And then you wonder why life feels like a cycle you can't break. Why the same triggers return. Why the same patterns repeat. Why the same people, the same emotions, the same disappointments keep showing up in different forms. It isn't bad luck. It isn't the universe working against you. It's the inner battle trying to be resolved through repetition. It's your unconscious attempting to finish a story that you left incomplete. But here's the part very few people dare to understand. The things inside you that feel the most painful are not signs of your weakness, they are signals of where you're fragmented. And fragmentation doesn't mean you are broken. It simply means there are pieces of you that have not met each other yet. Pieces of you that have been living separately, waiting for you to bring them home. This is why ignoring your pain only strengthens it. Why running from your fear only deepens it. Why suppressing your emotions only intensifies them. Because every part of you, even the ones you dislike, is trying to return to you, trying to reintegrate, trying to be understood. That is the battle you pretend isn't there. Not a battle of good versus bad, but a battle of disconnection versus integration. You push away the parts of yourself that feel messy, but those are the exact parts that hold your power, your potential, your authenticity, your depth. You fear the darkness because you forget that everything meaningful in your psychology, insight, intuition, creativity, resilience was born from that same darkness. When you finally stop running and turn toward the thing you fear, something extraordinary happens. The monster becomes smaller. The feeling becomes clearer. The fear becomes understandable. The shadow becomes a teacher. The chaos becomes a message. And the part of you you once resisted becomes the part that guides your growth. But this requires something most people never practice, and the courage to stay with yourself, to sit with discomfort without trying to mute it, to listen to your fear without trying to escape it, to feel your sadness without labeling it as weakness, to let your shadow speak without judging it as bad, because the moment you give yourself permission to experience your inner world fully, without defensiveness or denial, the battle shifts. You stop fighting yourself. You stop resisting what's trying to be healed, and you finally open the door to transformation. This is where integration begins. Not when you conquer your darkness, but when you acknowledge that it is a part of you and always has been. Not your enemy, but your unexpressed self. Not a threat, but a fractured piece of your identity. And once you allow these parts to step out of the shadows, you begin to understand why they have been fighting so hard for your attention. They were trying to protect you the only way they knew how. They were trying to prevent you from getting hurt again. They were trying to keep you safe even if their methods were messy or confusing. And this realization changes everything, because suddenly you stop seeing your inner battle as something to win, and you begin seeing it as something to listen to. to understand, to reconcile, to integrate. And the moment you do that, the moment you stop fighting yourself, the battle ends. The war dissolves. The conflict softens. Because peace isn't something you create by force. Peace is what naturally emerges when you stop abandoning the parts of yourself that need you the most. And that is when you finally understand. You were never meant to destroy the shadow. Only to bring it home. There comes a point in this internal battle where you have to face a truth that most people avoid for their entire lives. The greatest damage isn't done by your fear, your anger, or your insecurities. It's done by your refusal to take responsibility for them. Responsibility is not guilt. It's not blame. It's not self-punishment. Responsibility is simply the moment you stop waiting for someone else to fix what only you can face. It is the moment you stop pointing outward and finally turn inward. And for many people, this is where the battle intensifies, because the mind is incredibly skilled at creating illusions that protect the ego from discomfort. It whispers, "This is just who you are." It convinces you that your patterns are permanent. It covers your wounds with stories that make you feel harmless, innocent, powerless, and anything except responsible. Because the moment you accept responsibility, you gain power, and the ego is terrified of that power. Because once you possess it, you can no longer hide behind excuses you've been using to avoid your own evolution. When you look closely, you'll notice the mind has a quiet way of shifting responsibility elsewhere. You blame your childhood for your trust issues. You blame your past relationships for your fear of vulnerability. You blame society for your lack of direction. You blame circumstances for your lack of growth. And yes, these things shape you deeply. They leave marks. They influence the way you move through the world. But they don't have to define you forever, because your life does not change when the past changes. It changes when you change. There's a moment when you have to acknowledge that even if someone else caused your pain, it's still your job to heal it. Not because they deserve forgiveness, but because you deserve freedom. Otherwise, you're carrying wounds that were never meant to be permanent. You're living in patterns that don't belong to your present self anymore. You're allowing ghosts to make decisions for the living parts of you. And the longer you let those unconscious forces run the show, the more your life becomes a repetition of everything you're trying to escape. Responsibility isn't harsh, it's liberating. It's the moment you stop waiting for closure from someone who will never give it. It's the moment you stop expecting your fears to disappear magically. It's the moment you stop waiting for motivation and learn how to move without it. It's the moment you stop hoping for the right time and realize that the right time was always the moment you decided to begin. But here's the truth nobody tells you. Responsibility feels heavy at first, because it forces you to confront the idea that you had the power all along, which means you also had the power you didn't use. It forces you to sit with the decisions you avoided, the signs you ignored, the patterns you fed, the chances you didn't take. And yes, that realization can feel like a weight, but that weight becomes the foundation of transformation. It becomes the ground you stand on, because when you accept responsibility for your inner world, you finally begin to understand your own power. Most people think responsibility is about fixing everything instantly. It's not. It's about owning the part that is yours, the thoughts you nurture, the emotions you suppress, the choices you keep repeating, the boundaries you don't uphold. It's about recognizing when you're acting from fear instead of potential, when you're choosing comfort instead of growth, when you're staying silent instead of speaking truth, when you're shrinking yourself so that others can remain comfortable around you. The moment you take responsibility, you stop being a passenger in your own life. You stop reacting and start directing. You stop repeating patterns and start rewriting them. You stop letting your history become your destiny. And that is where power begins, in the quiet, uncomfortable place where you say, "This is mine to change. This is mine to face. This is mine to heal." And healing is not a straight line. It's a dialogue between you and the parts of yourself you once abandoned. It's learning to recognize when your fear is speaking instead of your truth. It's learning to pause when your past tries to hijack your present. It's learning to identify when your ego is protecting you from growth rather than danger. And slowly, as you keep showing up, the battle shifts. You begin to realize that responsibility is not something you carry alone. It's something that carries you. It becomes the anchor that steadies you during uncertainty. It becomes the compass that guides you when you feel lost. It becomes the power that reminds you that no matter what you've been through, you are still the one who decides who you become next. What most people never C is that the act of taking responsibility transforms your relationship with your own mind. You stop being intimidated by your thoughts. You stop fearing your emotions. You stop running from discomfort. Instead, you learn to meet it with clarity, with patience, with awareness. And that awareness changes everything. Because instead of being dragged by impulsive reactions, you begin responding with intention. Instead of being trapped in unexamined patterns, you begin choosing with consciousness. And instead of living in a blurred mix of instinct and memory, you begin experiencing your life with presence, fully awake, fully here, fully aligned. And that is when the inner battle softens, not because it disappears, but because you finally understand why it was there all along, not to punish you, but to awaken you, not to break you, but to reveal the parts of yourself you had forgotten, not to weaken you, but to prepare you for the strength you were always meant to grow into. Responsibility is not the end of your struggle, it's the beginning of your freedom. And that is why the turning point in your life will always be the moment you stop waiting for someone else to save you and then decide to become the one who does. There comes a moment in this inner battle when you notice something strange happening inside you. The parts you've been running from begin to follow you more intensely. The shadows you've avoided your entire life begin to grow louder. The feelings you've tried to numb start to rise without warning. And the ironic thing is this: the more you avoid the uncomfortable parts of yourself, the stronger they become. Not because they are evil, not because they are out to destroy you, but because they exist for a purpose you haven't yet understood. Every suppressed emotion, every abandoned dream, every buried fear, and none of them disappear. They wait. They wait in silence until the day you're finally ready to listen. And when they sense that the old ways of running no longer satisfy you, they push harder, not to punish you, but to wake you up. At first, this awakening feels like chaos. You feel restless, empty, confused, like something inside you is shifting, but you can't name it yet. You feel torn between the person you pretend to be and the person you secretly know you're meant to become. And that tension, that inner pull, is not a sign of failure. It is a sign of awakening. Because the truth is, transformation does not begin with clarity. It begins with discomfort. It begins with the breaking of illusions you once depended on. It begins with the collapse of an identity that no longer fits the size of your spirit. It begins the moment you admit that the life you've been living is too small for the person you are capable of becoming. You see, the unresolved parts of you, the fear, the guilt, the anger, the longing, they rise because they want integration, not exile. They want a seat at the table. They want recognition. They want to be transformed through awareness, not buried in silence. When you finally stop running, you begin to understand that these internal conflicts are not enemies but guides. They reveal the wounds you must heal, the boundaries you must learn, the truth you must embrace, the strength you have yet to embody. They show you what still controls you, and what is waiting to be reclaimed. The battle continues for as long as you avoid this truth, that peace is not found by eliminating your darkness but by integrating it. The parts you reject become the parts that control you from the shadows. The parts you embrace become the parts that serve your growth. When you allow yourself to truly face your inner conflicts, you begin to see which ones were created by fear, and which ones were created by potential calling you forward. Some of your inner battles aren't signals of weakness, they're signals that you're evolving, expanding, outgrowing your old self. But integration requires courage. It requires the willingness to sit in silence with the parts of you that make you uncomfortable. It requires the humility to acknowledge where you've been blind. It requires the maturity to accept that healing is not about becoming perfect. It's about becoming whole. And wholeness demands that you meet every side of yourself, not just the ones you're proud of. You have to meet the version of you that still feels unworthy. You have to meet the version of you that carries anger you never expressed. You have to meet the version of you that still craves validation. You have to meet the version of you that learned to shrink itself to avoid disappointing others. And when you finally face them, you realize they're not monsters. They're memories. They're unspoken stories. They're pieces of you that were never given the chance to grow. They don't need to be fought. They need to be understood. And slowly something remarkable happens. The inner battle that once felt overwhelming begins to quiet down. Not because your demons vanish, but because you stop treating them like demons. You stop running from your brokenness and start listening to it. You stop hiding from your fear and start asking what it wants you to protect. You stop resisting your pain and start understanding what it's trying to teach. And this shift, this inner shift, is where transformation begins. The truth is, the battle inside you was never meant to destroy you. It was meant to awaken you. It was meant to expose the limitations you've outgrown. It was meant to reveal the strengths you've ignored. It was meant to show you that the life you're longing for cannot be accessed by the person you are, pretending to be, only by the person you truly are. And that version of you, the integrated, aware, awake version, is not fragile. It's not conflicted. It's not lost. It is grounded. It is present. It is whole. It is capable of handling both pain and purpose without collapsing. But to reach that version, you must be willing to walk through the discomfort of meeting yourself honestly. Most people avoid this journey because they fear it will break them. But you are beginning to understand that meeting yourself is not the path to destruction. It is the path to liberation. Because the version of you've been running from is the one you were always meant to become.